Good morning, everybody. Happy 4th of July. We've got a special freedom episode for you today. Today's special show. Normally, I wouldn't do a show on an annual holiday just because y'all are busy or sleeping in or doing whatever you're going to do. But I've been thinking a lot about freedom, and I've been thinking a lot about rights, and I've been thinking about everything that you assume about freedom that I think might be just a little off. Jared jumps in. Oh, that was me posting right there. Good morning, Whiteboard Crypto. How you doing? This morning we're talking about rights. Billy Weigel jumping in bright and early. This guy just closed on a property in Cocoa on the Beach, I think. Congratulations, man. I hope you're doing fantastic. So today's episode, we're talking about a special 4th of July freedom episode. I think it's important that my international audience know that not every American thinks the same way about freedom, and that my American audience think a little bit more about what we call freedom. I'm going to challenge your assumptions today, but hopefully we're going to come out on top. Whiteboard Crypto, awesome. Glad to hear it, Whiteboard Crypto. I don't know who you are, but maybe I do, maybe I don't. Maybe you're in our Discord. I don't even know, but pleasure to meet you. I'm glad to have you here. Before we talk about freedom, real quick, we're going to talk very briefly about other news, but the other news today is contextual for freedom. We're going to talk a little bit about that. But before we do that, let's do Morning Cup of Gratitude. What are you grateful for? Man, if you cannot start this day with gratitude, I'm telling you, I think, Whiteboard Crypto says she is from Australia. I hope you're doing fantastic. And thanks for stopping in. You should be going to bed soon, right? I mean, I think you're 14 hours difference or something like that. Billy Weigel says, I think the international audience can understand freedom by a little-known movie called Braveheart. We all feel it. I feel you, Billy. Yet another American movie, right? Good one. So, hey, Morning Cup of Gratitude, people. If you cannot start your day with gratitude, how are you even getting going? If you don't know what you're grateful for, if you don't know what you're focused on, if you don't know what you're pumped about, if you cannot articulate to others, I am grateful for this. Should you even leave the house or do a Zoom call? I want to hear in the comments what you're grateful for. Whiteboard Crypto, if you're still floating around from Australia. Billy, I want to hear from you guys. Post in the comments what you're grateful for, and I want to celebrate that with you, because when you say that thing out loud, your entire physiology shifts to being more open, and we got to be more open to be able to actually access, here we go, our freedom. What am I grateful for today? I'm grateful for an awesome team. I'm grateful for an extended weekend. I'm grateful for my workouts right now. They're killing it. I've been doing 2-a-days. We're really going hard after 75 hard, but not really 75 hard. I got a workout program where I'm working out in the morning and in the afternoon, and it's intense. It's like 40 minutes both. So I've been ramping up my protein. Grateful for that. I'm grateful for my investments. I am grateful that Bitcoin is under 20K, and I'll be grateful when it's around 15K. I'm super grateful for that because those are my buying opportunities. I'm grateful for my partnership with our buddy Austin, who we've been cultivating and curating, that inventor. He's basically building a Discord bot that does certain key features, and we were investors in that. Super pumped about that. What are you pumped for today? You know I could keep going on because my heart is full of gratitude. I'm grateful for serious conversations me and my wife had this weekend that have just needed to happen and need to continue to happen. I'm grateful for the ability to have those dialogues. What are you grateful for today? Let's talk about other news. Thunderbird art in indigenous rights to water. Recently, Billy jumps in. Finally, thank you, my man. Boom. He shares with me what he's grateful for. Thankful for my family. Happy and healthy. Grateful for my investments and knowing that I will hold long-term and succeed. Made for diamond hands. Billy, we just saw the documentary last night about the Wall Street Bets GameStop doohickey. This thing was awesome. And this is where we came up with the term diamond hands in that Reddit feed. You got to watch the documentary on what happened with GameStop and Wall Street Bets. It was super inspiring. Thank you, Whiteboard Crypto. I appreciate this. Whiteboard Crypto posting a 16-year-old daughter. That means the world to me. Hey, listen, I'm going to tell you this, and I don't mean to impress you, but to impress upon you how important this point is. My grandmother passed last week, and what mattered more than anything in the world was the people around her as she went. Now, I don't necessarily believe I'm going to be Mr. Famous. I don't necessarily believe I'm going to have 1,000 people at a funeral or anything crazy like that. but I do want to be sure that I am at least surrounded by one person who knows me, understands me, and loves me. Loves me. A 16-year-old daughter that means the world to me. Let me tell you something. I don't have kids, and I don't pretend to know what it's like to be a parent, and I don't pretend to know that I will ever know what it's like to be a parent. But the closest I can approximate that is my acknowledgement that it is people and there is nothing else. I just saw one of, if you guys been following Alex Harmozy, I think I'm saying his last name right. He's really blowing up on social right now. I heard a great quote by him, and he said, "When I was 30 and became a millionaire, when I was in my 20s, all I wanted to do was be a millionaire. When I was a millionaire, all I wanted to do was be in my 20s." And he said, "I'm very certain that the things I'm going to accomplish next, I want them very bad, 100%. But when I have them, I'm willing to bet I wish I were right here." It's always what you think, and it's always what you don't think, and it's never what you think. And by that, I mean, I'm a big goal setter. You should have goals. You should have fitness goals. You should have life goals. But in the end, the only thing that really matter is this right here and the people around us. And Billy Weigel also sharing some love for that comment, Whiteboard Crypto. Billy Weigel's got a family that he loves and he's passionate about. So Billy Weigel hyping you a little bit there. Got love for you. Let's talk about Thunderbird art and indigenous rights to water. Quick piece of other news that'll make you smarter, so that you have something more intelligent to talk about than what mainstream media is talking about. At the Metropolitan Museum of Art, there's a show going on right now called Water Memories. And Water Memories itself, the initial image was beautiful. And this art show in the museum, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, is about indigenous rights to water. It's political in nature. But hold on for a second. Don't dive away. There's one particular piece that caught me, and I have a link for you here. There's one particular piece in this art gallery that I have a heart for, and it is a denim jacket. Now, denim jackets can be in if you got the look for it, right? But not everyone can sport a denim jacket. But in this Metropolitan Museum art exhibit for indigenous rights to water called Water Memories, this denim jacket is there. And on the back of this denim jacket is this beautiful red and blue velvet Thunderbird. And if you're familiar with the indigenous symbol for Thunderbird, it symbolizes a lot. It actually symbolizes a thundercloud, as in rain. And this denim jacket is well worn. And on the back, it's got this awesome Thunderbird. And you're like, oh, badass. This feels like it's from the 80s and 90s. It feels badass. And down the sleeves, coming from the wings of the Thunderbird, coming down the sleeves are turquoise beads. Now, these turquoise beads were put on there in the late 60s, early 70s by a young 19-year-old boy by the name of Rick St. Germain. Ricky St. Germain actually wove those very beads into his own denim jacket, and he said they resemble water droplets. Now, the reason he was doing this is he put together this denim jacket because he was attending along with his mother and the rest of the LaCourte Orioles band of Wisconsin to occupy the dam, the winter dam in Wisconsin in the early 90s. Now, for some of you who don't know, we've had several revolts. And in the 70s, we had indigenous riots and revolts, which are understandable. And a group of Indians, a group of indigenous people, actually invaded the winter dam. And it was mostly the Lake Superior Chippewa Indians who were basically making a statement that this water that you damming up the water is imposing on our rights. Whiteboard Crypto throws an angel face. Boom! Feeling a little angelic. I feel you. Now, this went on in the 70s. And for those who don't know, it's worth looking into how much resistance there were in the 70s. There's several great books you should read, and we've got them on our shelves floating around. One is The Land is Not Empty, and a story of an indigenous view of the land. Fantastic book. Another is God is Red, a fantastic indigenous view of the one and only God, long before missionaries ever got here. But these books also tell of the histories that were going on in this occurrence where the Lake Chippewa Band of Indians actually occupied the winter dam in Wisconsin. It was very profound, and it was about water rights. I say all that to say this. Here's the link to this beautiful art gallery, art show going on at the Met. And here's the other significant thing that happened with this. They have there, for the first time ever, their own indigenous art curator on staff. And this indigenous art curator on staff finally convinced the Metropolitan Museum of Art to move the Native American pieces of art out of the international wing. For those who don't know, For the longest time, indigenous artwork, Native American artwork in the Met was actually placed in the international wing, far away from my American exhibits. But for the first time ever, they have now moved the indigenous artwork where it belongs in the American exhibit. Now, we're talking about water, but we're talking about rights. And there's a connection between rights and freedom that we're going to talk about in just a quick second. But please note, there is a difference between rights and freedom. We're going to talk more about that, but we touched on the indigenous story as a little bit of backdrop on this conversation on the 4th of July of what are rights and what are freedoms. And if you're feeling crunchy at all about where we're going, I'm not going to get political. I promise you, I won't get political, because that is one of the crimes of our view of freedom, is that freedoms are political, and they're not. Rights are. That's for later down the road. Let's talk about another point of freedom, cryptocurrency and your financial freedom. Quick piece of other news. Today's not crypto day. Tomorrow, me and Jarrett Carpenter and Jay Harris get together for our fun show, Not Crypto Bros, Tuesday afternoon. It's scheduled. You can check it out in Discord, on Twitter. We have a scheduled event on Facebook, LinkedIn. Find us in those places. We'll be focused on the LinkedIn audience for that for a little while. That's tomorrow afternoon. Today, all I'm talking about is what's going on in the crypto market. Now, for those who don't know, in the American markets, it's July 4th. So, hey, the traditional markets are closed. So the DeFi markets are still cruising. Bitcoin is up 1.96% at $19,400. Kind of flat. It's been flat for a few days, in all honesty. It's been down from last month, but it's been flat for the last week or so. Ethereum is up 0.97% at $1,071. This is nearly the same as last Friday, nearly. And Cardano, my third favorite crypto, is up 0.6%. Actually, no, I'm sorry, 6% a little bit ago. Is that accurate? No, I'm sorry, 0.6% at 45 cents. Again, all of these have been nearly flat. That's okay. Let's ask ourselves, is it hottest on the earth when we're closer to the sun or further away? Let's talk about it. Happy 4th of Aphelion. Yes, the Aphelion. When people see the word, they want to say aphelion, which, because of the pH close to each other, it looks like aphelion. But for those who don't know, the word aphelion refers to Helios, the sun, and ap meaning furthest from or out of. Aphelion. Listen, my little etymologists. You got to know where these words come from, as you're pronouncing them wrong, but also interpreting their meaning funky. Today, July 4th, is the aphelion of the Earth from the sun. Now, the aphelion simply means that we are the furthest from the sun that we are in our orbit. So the answer to the question is, it is hottest when we're furthest from the sun, but that's just pertains to us. That's unique to our tiny little terra firma Earth. We are approximately 94.5 million miles away from the sun right now, and that was as of 3 a.m. Now, that's only 1.67% further from the sun than our normal distance. In fact, statistically, our normal distance from the sun is almost statistically a perfect circle. Technically, it is not. Technically, it's a little wobbly, but that's about 1.67%. Now, at the normal mean distance, we are 92.96 million miles away from the sun, which is, for those who don't know, what's the term? I'm quizzing your intelligence for things that are other than in mainstream media. No, not what is the size of Kim Kardashian's shoe. No, not how much is Jay-Z worth. But do you just simply know what an astronomical unit is? 92.96 million miles away from the sun, which is Earth's distance from the sun, which is an arbitrary measurement, admittedly, but we needed a way to start measuring things and their distance from the sun relative to the Earth, and that made the most sense. An AU, an astronomical unit. If you want to learn more about our aphelion and to continue to defy your assumptions about this thing, the perihelion, when we're actually closest to the sun, is on January 4th. January 4th. And it's one of our coldest days, at least in the northern hemisphere, because we're in winter. So it's the tilt that makes us summer or winter, hotter or colder. It's the distance that basically creates our mean temperature, but determines whether or not we're aphelion or perihelion. Questioning your assumptions today about what you knew about astronomy, Lisa Welsh, boom. No, I didn't know that, but I would more likely know that than anything about a Kardashian. And this is what makes you a better human, Lisa Welsh, is the fact that you don't know these things. Congratulations for not knowing these things. Let's talk about whether or not you could actually be a freedom fighter. Hint, the answer is no. There is no such thing. For today's brief special, this is the 4th of July Freedom episode. And yes, I do want to give you the 5 ways you get freedom wrong. And I'm going to give you the 5 ways we can get freedom right. And I think it's supremely important that we actually ask ourselves these questions. Listen, you come to Grant's show, you're not going to get it superficial. We might be talking about art. We might be talking about science. We might be talking about small business. But what we're always talking about is personal development. What we're always talking about is you living your absolute best. And the way that we can get in our way of living best is misinterpreting what rights and freedoms are. Can you be a freedom fighter? No, you can't. I know I've used that term before. I know you've used that term before. I know often when we think about freedom, we think about someone in shackles. When we think about human trafficking, we think we're setting this person free. Well, free is a different word than freedom, and we are setting that person free from a situation. But that is not the concept known as freedom. The concept known as freedom is something else. The reason that there is no such thing as a freedom fighter is freedom cannot be, hear me on this, and bear with me. Please be patient. This gets better. Freedom cannot be fought for, except on the meditation mat, in your journal. When you're facing your demons at the gym, freedom fighting is not an external fight, and it never has been. And I'm not giving you lip service. Those are fights for rights. You can fight for those things. Those are fights for rights. But if you're talking about fighting for freedom, you're implying something that's not external. You can't fight for someone else's rights. Or I'm sorry, strike that. You can't fight for someone else's freedom. You can't fight for it. You can fight for someone else's rights. You can't fight for someone else's freedom. You can't fight for your own freedom. You can fight for your own rights. There's a significant difference between rights and freedoms. And I want to really land this home in today's 5 ways to get freedom wrong and 5 ways to get freedoms right. Now, a big political thing happened last week, and I'm not going to take a hard position on this. I don't feel like I have the right to, as a male, to talk about the rights of a woman's body, to talk about any of that. But what I can talk about is freedom and imposing your sense of freedom on somebody else is actually dictating what their rights are. You're actually having a rights discussion, not a freedom discussion. So I think, especially with so much going on, not only in the pandemic, we had Black Lives Matter, we had Me Too movement, we had so many of these very important rights-based movements that were expressions of someone's sense of freedom. You can express freedom. You can't fight for someone else's freedom. Let's talk about this. Grant, you're going to have to give me some context. Grant, I'm about to get pissed with you, so be careful. Tread carefully. No problem. Let's get right into it. The 5 ways to get freedom wrong. The first way to get freedom wrong is this. Number 1, imposing your theologies on someone else's bodies and persons. Projecting your sense of cosmology, who is in the great sky above, and somehow trickling that down to preventing someone else from acting on their own sense of ideologies. Moving from your internal sense of cosmology and theology to what other people can do and believe and think. When you impose your own sense of right and wrong on others, you are limiting their rights. That means that you exercising your freedom is required to oppress someone else's. That's how you get freedom wrong. You're doing it wrong. That's not freedom. That's not even freedom on you. If you look at someone else and say, my theologies, my ideologies, my paradigms, my sense of freedom, my sense of rights, what I want to do with myself, my body, my world, my worship, you have to do too. That's when you've crossed the line. Now, you can fight for those rights, but don't call them freedom. In fact, call it the opposite. Call it oppression, but and own it. I really do need to oppress you. Say it what it is. Don't try to wordsmith it and spin it. When you impose your sense of right and wrong on the world and require someone else to do that, you are limiting them. And that's what you want out of life. That's okay. It really is. It's truly okay because that's the way the world works. But don't call it what it's not. Don't call it freedom. Call it oppression. And you're allowed to do that. Own it. The first way to get freedom wrong is to impose your theologies and ideologies and sense of right or wrong and expect or demand other people do the same. Number two, the way to get freedoms wrong is to confuse freedoms with rights. And you've heard me pound on this. A set of rights is given by a state. A state, we wish, should be made up of a populace, representatives who represent the populace. Then the forgetting, again, we're like grazing, we're grazing politics, but I'm not going to get into this. But a state should be led by the people representatively. Those people should then pass rules about rights and limitations. But to have your rights challenged is not necessarily to challenge your freedom. And so the language has to clear up. In the example I gave above, you can have theologies that dictate your sense of rights, and then you can fight for those rights, and then those rights can challenge other people's theologies. That's fine, but don't mingle the two. When you confuse freedoms with rights, you actually start mingling religion with rule of law. If you have a theological reason for the way a right should be imposed, you're already starting to mingle things. But if you have a rational, as a polis, we used to call the populace, the polis, the P-O-L-I-S. And it was people who were only given the right if they obtained the ability to wage rationale together and to propose logics, ethos, pathos, logos. They would put all these together and actually deliberate one to another, but it wasn't religiously driven. It was rationally driven on what was good for the populace at large. And the rights and laws of a land should represent, hey, if we're a theological society, you're allowed to do that. But if you're a society that actually espouses freedom of religion, then it should all be rationale of what's best for the society. And all of your arguments should be like, I think this is best for the population. Let's deliberate one to another and understand what's right for that population. Do not confuse freedoms with rights. How do we do that? We'll get to how we start to parse those out. The third way to get freedom wrong is to confuse freedom of expression with having the fight for rights. You being allowed to express yourself should always be free, in my opinion. You should always have the freedom of expression. But freedom of expression is not the right to stand in a movie. You've heard this argument, to stand in a movie theater and shout fire. That is illegal. That's not freedom of expression. Expression is a clear opinion. This is why this truthiness world and this alternative facts world that we've gotten into makes dialogue very difficult, because we've begun to water down the difference between an opinion and a fact. You could be in a movie theater and yell, fire, and a stampede occurs, people die. You're sitting before the judge and say, hey, I just had an alternative fact. I thought there was a fire, but there was no factually a fire. And now you're like, no, that's freedom of expression. I'm allowed to say what I want. Freedom of expression does not mean you get to say what you want. Freedom of expression means you get to express yourself and your opinions. The implication is your opinions. You can have an opinion, but an opinion is only one side of a debate of what's right for a population, aka the dialogue for rights. So when you confuse freedom of expression, I think there's a sky god. I think there's a satanic god. Okay, you can express that. Are we having a deliberation about what's good for society? No, you're expressing yourself. Go to town. But confusing that with using that as an argument for rights, you sound silly. Well, I look foolish to the world. That's great. You still sound silly, and it's not good. It doesn't make an opinion about what's good for society. And so I can't interface, because you're operating on not just alternative facts, you're operating on alternative paradigm entirely. And it's not showing a willingness to do what's right for society. It's just showing a willingness to impose what you think is your theology on a society. Don't confuse freedom of expression with the fight for rights. When you confuse the two, you don't have an equal playing ground by which to dialogue and both to come to a consensus. That's what we want anyway. We don't want to fight over things. We want to deliberate one with another. We want to shape a society, not force a society to be one way or the next, or just every political cycle. We just expect the extreme to show up. I fully expect in the next election cycle for the pendulum to swing extremely the other way. No one wants that. And that is not the foundation of a civil society. It is the way many societies are founded. So if you could say, no, I don't mind a violent society, okay, admit that and go extreme. No, I don't mind a semi oppressive society. Okay, by all means, be very transparent and clear, and we can talk about that. But don't call it freedom if it's imposing limitations on another person. The fourth way we get freedom wrong is we think freedom is from a particular country. Americans did not invent freedom. It's the 4th of July. I love America. I love being here. I've traveled the world and I still love returning to America. It's my culture, it's my background. A lot of my ideologies come from here. I thrive the most from a business perspective when I'm in America. Don't have a beef with America, but we didn't invent freedom. It's not even our best export, though a lot of people like to think it is. It was a very strong part of our founding roots. It was the ultimate foundational root of America. But it was formulated in a live and let live world, meaning you don't tell me what to do, and I don't tell you what to do. It was codified. Freedom in general was drawn into the Constitution, but not initially, primarily as a set of laws. Again, freedoms versus rights. Your rights. It's called the Bill of Rights, not the Bill of Freedoms. Hello? It's called the Bill of Rights. Here's the rights that the state is saying you are allowed to run with, and then we'll modify these over time. But it's not synonymous with freedom. Freedom is not from a particular country. Is Australia more free in a lot of ways? Are the Nordic countries with Nordic social capitalism free? In a lot of ways. In all ways? No, of course not. Freedom is transcendent. Freedom isn't political. I know most of my points to this point have been political because the main way we get freedom wrong is that we make freedom political. That's the main way we get freedom wrong. But in this situation in point 4, freedom is much higher than a country. America, in fact, in a lot of ways, America's representation of freedom in the world has gone down significantly. And no, I'm not talking about the Democratic left. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the inability to create a civil society. Civil society. The inability to dialogue with those of opposing views and love them, high five, and go for beers afterwards. Freedom. Freedom to be who you are. Freedom to live and let live. If you go to pioneer colonial America and they said, here are your freedoms, everyone who was in Boston waiting for that announcement tipped their tricorner hat, said, thanks a lot, boss, and went out to the frontier and started living their freedom. Don't tell me what to do, and I'm not going to tell you what to do. Don't come on my property, and I won't shoot you in the face. I'm going to live out the way I want to with polyamory in Utah and monogamy through most of the eastern seaboard. We're going to do what we're going to do. Now, there's a lot of nuance to this in the 300 some odd years since then, I grant it. But freedom is not from a particular country. It's a craving inside of us that we all want. And that craving is, don't limit my agency. I'm not here to limit yours. Everything else, every time we talk about limitations, we're talking about rights and privileges from a state. But freedom is an internal desire to wake up and have agency over one's own life. The fifth way that we get freedom wrong is that we think freedom is easy. We think freedom is easy. We hear this phrase as it comes to the military, freedom ain't free. Someone paid that price. I do agree with that. They didn't pay for freedom. They paid for rights. Rights aren't free. I had to go over to Vietnam. I had to go over to World War II for your freedom. Nope. You went over there for my rights. If I'm still fighting for skin color, what to do with my own body, you didn't give me freedom. You gave me a certain set of rights. You gave people in Europe a good set of rights to start dictating what they're going to do in their own civil societies as they see fit to move forward. But you didn't give them freedom. Freedom was in their heart all the time. Don't believe me? Ask Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. Ask As a Man Thinketh. These are people who were in, I have it right here somewhere, Man's search for meaning. Nope. Sorry, it's usually right there. These are people who were in internment camps and had freedom because freedom's in here. Great book title that I read, and it's a religious book. Feel free to read it. It's actually really good for those in the ministry. It's called The Burden of Freedom. The fifth way we get freedom wrong is believe that it's easy. Believe that having agency is easy. When me and Marissa moved to the Dominican Republic, we had a great amount of freedom and rights, and it was not easy. We had one of the toughest years as a married couple. It was our second or third year married, and it was very difficult year. It wasn't easy. Fighting for financial freedom, location freedom has not been easy. We have a website company, a billing company. There used to be a bookkeeping company, and it's evolved. We had a marketing company that doesn't exist anymore. Freedom's not easy. The freedom of movement. That means I got to go stretch every day at the gym. The freedom to have fitness. That means I got to go hit the gym to get my fitness back twice a day and eat. I think it's something like 160 grams of protein every day. It's not easy. First world problems I just described. But anywhere you go, freedoms aren't easy. Rights are even harder. Rights are even harder in a lot of ways. But thinking freedom is easy is the fifth way that we get freedom wrong. Now, if you feel butthurt about anything I said, in fact, I watched the numbers peak and then drop as I started hitting on those because y'all thought I was going to take it too far. Maybe I did. I don't know. But those are the five main ways I see us getting freedom wrong. And the biggest way, the biggest of all of that is mistaking that it's an outside factor. So let's get to how to get freedom right so we can celebrate this 4th of July introspectively a little bit. Number one, the first way to get freedom right is to know that freedom begins and ends. Begins and ends inside of you. Freedom begins and ends inside of you. The desire for freedom starts inside of you, and we say, well, that's God. That's the God in me. Maybe. I say it's the oneness in me, which is my version of God. But even if it's not that, even if it's an atheistic biological imperative to go where you want and do what you want, if I were a panther in the woods, freedom, I believe wildlife experiences freedom. They wake up, they sniff and think, I'm going to go get me something to eat. And then they go along and do that thing. Now, they don't have a lot of rights. The Florida Wildlife Corridor is a sliver of this state. And if I were a Florida panther trying to get fed, I don't have a lot of rights. There's very limited places I could go. But the agency is inside of that creature, and it's inside of me, and it's inside of you. The desire to go where you want, do what you want. Getting freedom right starts, number one, knowing that freedom starts and ends inside of you. As soon as you start transferring this right to freedom or this feeling of freedom outside of you, you're in the realm of rights and privileges. Freedom is a sense. It's a feeling. It's a state inside of you. It's too early in the morning for this word, but I'm going to drop it anyway. Unfuckwithable. It's the place where you're unfuckwithable. That's freedom. It's the freedom of heart, the freedom to think, the freedom to even speak your mind. That's the freedom of expression. We have that. We have the freedom of expression in our Constitution, but it's not on the Bill of Rights. Fun thing to think. Or it is the first part of the Bill of Rights, but we could talk about that later. How to get freedom right, number two. Face the fear. This is ultimate. Face the fear of the negative consequences of the decisions you want to make and own that you are deciding for or against them. Here's the thing. Freedom is something that begins and ends inside of you. As soon as you start blaming someone else, oh my gosh, I couldn't do thus and so. You have not faced, for example, let's say I want to move to the beach and start surfing, but I don't because Marissa's here, our investments are here. Let's say that I want to move to the beach, but I don't. Why don't I move to the beach? Well, I don't want to move to the beach. I don't want to create problems in my marriage with Marissa. She's here. Our investments are here. If I go there, it's going to be stranded on our finances. And then I sit and stew about that, and I start crossing my arms, and I go, ugh, Marissa always limits me. What the hell am I talking about? All that happened in my head. I had conflicting desires. I want to make Marissa happy. I want to spend time with Marissa. I want to my finances grow. I don't want to strain my finances prematurely. All that happened inside of me. Too often when you are fighting for rights outside of yourself, you have not looked at yourself and said, I actually am limiting myself here, not other people. When you look to the government for yet another bailout, you're probably caught economically and pragmatically so. But that's actually probably the root of you not actually being integrated with what you've wanted for the last so many years. Your financial situation today, when the pandemic hit, is a result of all of the decisions of you being conflicted inside of yourself and not facing it. I want to be a millionaire, but I also want to be humble and I want to do, and we don't sort these things out. So the second way to get freedom right, the first way, the foundational way, is to know that it starts and ends inside of you. That alone you could just cook your gourd with if you think about it throughout the day. The second one is to face your fear of the negative consequences of the decisions you want to make. I am not willing to create that strain on my marriage and in my economy. So I'm not going to move to the beach. I'm going to be butthurt about it, but what I can't do is blame anybody and fight for my rights to live on the beach. I have to own the fact that I am deciding against that. I need to journal that. I need to write that down. I need to pin it on the wall. That was me. So few of us look at our life and go, I made that decision. They want to say, I made that decision for you. So then you should own something about it and make that better for me. These unspoken contracts. And then the other person goes, you told me it was okay. This is where human dynamics fall apart, is that we forget the responsibility to communicate what we need begins and ends inside of us. Number one, know that freedom starts and ends inside of you. Number two, face the fear of the negative consequences of the decisions you want to make, and then decide if you want to face those negative consequences. You're already making that decision, but your outflow, the result of that is that you blame other people for not having what you want. Number three, the third way to get freedom right, please become intelligent. What did Grant say on a Monday? You need to be more intelligent. And by that, I don't mean intellectual points that you score on the ASVAB. I mean, you need to have emotional intelligence. You need to spend time in your journal. You need to actually read on these topics. If you have a position on Roe versus Wade, could you tell me who Roe and who Wade were? Could you tell me what the actual law was about? It wasn't about reproductive rights, so don't say that. What are the nuances of what the justices are doing? Now, let's get off of that because that's highly charged. Let's talk about business. Do you have the right to a bailout during the pandemic? No, you have a privilege. That was like a bonus. That was like a cherry on top. Does the government have a responsibility to do this for you? No, it'd be great if they did, but they don't have a responsibility to. A lot of people got a lot of help. A lot of people didn't get any help during the bailout. That's okay. There was a lot of shenanigans and corruption in the bailout. Of course, we know that. That's like par for the course. But should they be required to? What are the nuances of the PPP? Did you do your homework? The third way to get freedom right, this is the burden of freedom. The burden of freedom is to be educated. If there's a thing that you want, it is up to you to read 3 books on it this week. You said you wanted it. Do you not want it? If you don't really want it, quit bitching about it. But if you want it and you really think you really want it, prove it to me by posting the last 3 books you read on that thing. And then talk to me about it. Become intelligent about freedoms and the differences between freedoms and rights. You could go to the wall being unfuckwithable as it comes to your freedom. When it comes to your rights, there should probably be a little finagling, a little flexibility. Number 3, become intelligent about the thing you say you want, about your freedoms. Number 4, and if this is not abundantly clear, I had to put this in as its own point. The 4th way to get freedom right is to take responsibility for your outcomes. If you are in a dialogue with your spouse about something important, at some point, you will expect your spouse to own up to it. Guess what? They're doing the same thing. Both of you should own, listen, it was my fault. I communicated like this and I shouldn't have. Knowing what I now know, I would have communicated like that. Hug, love, let's move on. But it turns into a fight when two people blame. Now, what does it also do? What other domain of our life does it do this? Politics. Let's own. Oh, you know what? I believe, oh, in Roe versus Wade, we have to own the fact that we were skating by and didn't add the necessary laws we should have for the last 40 or 50 years. We should have added a lot more laws to truly protect a woman's rights and to differentiate these rights. And we should have done more science, more research, more support that the Supreme Court just come in and do this, and then suddenly things are the way they are. Or if you're on the other side, you should have codified laws and brought laws in to support these things. But because we're not owning this fact when we dialogue, we just say, God said, and then we say, no, God said, it's my body, my choice. And no, and what we didn't start with is, hey, this is my fault for not being clear, for imposing X, Y, and Z. This is my fault for not being clear and imposing X, Y, and Z. Hey, listen, this is what I really want. It starts with, and this is what the Greeks had 3,000 years ago, but we've somehow lost in dialogue. It's called ethos, pathos, logos. It's establishing an ethos. Hey, we all want actually the same thing, a civil society where we're moving forward, where each of us can live out our own sense of freedom. Yeah, hey. And pathos goes, I know how you feel. I feel the same way. This is the things that I've been struggling with. We can understand that. Just read some of the transcripts from the Greek city-states, and you will realize the first thing, nearly all of these dialogues started with owning the results they've gotten to date. Hey, it's my fault. I made all these decisions and it led me here, but now I want to make a change. The fourth way to get freedom right is to take responsibility for your outcomes. You will find if there is a person who has been an opponent in your life and you take responsibility, you will suddenly find an ally. Take my word on that. Fifth way on how to get freedom right. Quit telling other people what they can and can't do as a reaction to your own limitations. Quit telling people what they can and cannot do as a reaction to the limitations you have. If you feel limited in a domain of your life and you stop requiring other people to shape their life around you, I guarantee you will find more support for the freedoms you are trying to express, for the rights you're trying to have, for the benefits you want out of life. If you go through life feeling hurt about a limitation, if you go through life feeling hurt about some societal construct, and you blame and accuse other people, and as a result tell them what they can't do, you're actually not doing anything constructive for the thing you do want. You're just picking a fight because it's the nearest approximation to agency you feel. You know what? I don't know how to, if I am handicapped and I want rights, if I'm trans and I want to perform and they're shutting me down, I'm a trans man or a trans woman and I want to perform in the Olympics, but now they're shutting me down. And so I'm going to fight them about their limitations. That's not the approach. Start constructing a third option. It's called third option ethics. Start coming up with a way to do this. But the one thing you can't start doing is telling other people what they can and can't do with their own lives. Remember, the freedoms articulated in the Constitution when it began were freedoms to live and let live. The freedom's what we're not going to tell you what to do about. That was the ethos. Now, I grant that a constitution should evolve. I'm not a strict constitutionalist. I believe that a constitution should evolve, but the spirit of the Constitution is that we're not going to tell you what to do, as long as it doesn't violate the rights of others. Napoleon Hill had this quote in Think and Grow Rich when describing Henry Ford. And the definition of education is how to obtain what you want in life without violating the rights of others. Now, we could sit over coffee and talk a little more closely about my rationale on Roe v. Wade. And it doesn't have anything to do with feminism. It has everything to do with the logic of rights versus freedoms. But in the end, we are getting freedoms so wrong. We are considering rights freedoms We're using the term freedom and it's becoming perverted. In fact, around the world, the idea of Americanism and freedom is starting to taste rather bland. How do we take it back? Number one, know that freedom begins, but most importantly, ends inside of you. The fight for freedom does not exist outside of your body. The fight for freedom happens between you and the gym mat, the yoga mat, your journal, your private space where you admit some things to yourself. And that leads us to the second point. The second way to get freedom, right, is to face the fear of negative consequences of the decisions you want to make but aren't making, that you're afraid to make. That is no one else's fault. That's why it begins and ends inside of you. The third, become intelligent, please, about the topics you are talking about. If you do not actually know the details, shut your mouth, because you'll devolve into fighting and not into deliberating. And that always ends up challenging everyone's freedoms and everyone's rights. The fourth way is take responsibility for your outcomes immediately and stop blaming anyone for the way things are today. There is nothing that is worth blaming. Now, are there reasons for the way something came? Yeah, I'm not talking about ignoring those, but it doesn't help in a discussion. Know those inside of you. Create your principles, like Ray Dalio's book, Principles. Come up with your own principles for living. But if you're in a dialogue and you're trying to get someone who has been an opponent to become an ally, they don't need to know their role in what you think was your oppression. Own, take responsibility, quit blaming. This is a communication tool. Don't think I'm talking about ignoring logic. It's a communication tool. Quit blaming and take responsibility for your outcome. Number 5, quit telling other people what they can and cannot do. Hype people, encourage people, tell them that the world is their oyster. Listen, what is it they want to do? Tell them, if they've asked only, some of the challenges they might have. But no matter what, quit dictating the limitations on other people, and you will experience freedom. These things are not political. I know it sounds like they're political, but when you do things this way, your own heart has a heart of freedom. When you oppress someone else, you are in a state of oppression. I don't care if you think it's theological. I don't think if you think it's ideological. As soon as you limit someone to that same degree, you become limited in your heart. If I tell someone they can't jaywalk, I now have to remember that I cannot jaywalk. I have to have integrity with that. And then I now, probably doubly so, have to be aware that at any moment they could tell me what I can't do. I'm talking about the internal life. I'm not talking about politics, believe it or not. I'm talking about how you feel. So living a life that only selectively imposes limitation of rights on other people, but more abundantly encourages freedom and agency to live and let live without violating the rights of others is the key, right? And by violating the rights of others, the only people who should be fighting for their rights are the people who are limited by those rights or their direct allies, those directly involved. We talk more about that some other time. Quit telling people what to do. Why are we talking about freedom? Well, hey, it's July 4th. And my heart is heavy with how we have perverted and twisted how we treat freedom. But the other thing is this: no matter what you do today, the reason we're talking about freedom is that people need to feel more free because they are their own worst jailers. Their political opponents are bad. Their internal voice is worse. It's worse. It's less loud. It's not throwing trash cans through shopkeepers' windows. It's not forcing everyone to carry guns. But it's just as pernicious. It's just as subtle. Or it's just as powerful, though it's subtle. That is burning people that they are their own worst jailers. And the one thing I want with State of the Spark is for you to be activated to help other people achieve freedom. And this is what we call igniting lives of explosive significance. No matter what you do today with your freedom, do that. Ignite lives of explosive significance, starting with your own. Have a great 4th of July.